Terry, we're really grateful that you've taken some time to speak to us today. And actually, you're due to be one of our keynote speakers at one of our London events later in the year. And I'm sorry that we've had to cancel that, at least for now. I think we were going to come to Lambeth Palace, which we were really looking forward to. But I think it's worth starting by saying that maybe there's a generation out there today that haven't heard your most incredible story. So would you mind if I asked you just to summarize what happened to you in the late 1980s that plunged you into the center of world news at the time?
Well, going back now, it's going back a long time, isn't it? It makes me realize that I'm getting on in years. But in those days, in the 1980s, I was on the staff of Robert Runcie, Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, I'm not a clergyman, I'm a layman, and I've worked from a church base for most of my life. And my first major appointment was an advisor to the then Archbishop of Uganda, the first African Archbishop of Uganda. And it was there that I really began my experience in negotiating for people who had been illegally detained. And I negotiated directly with the Min in those years. And it was in Uganda, I suppose, that I witnessed the most terrible atrocities committed on innocent people. I actually saw people murdered before my eyes. And it was a very hard experience for a comparatively young man. I was in my 20s. And the church actually played an extremely important role. Janani Lawum, who was Archbishop, continued to protest against the atrocities.
He was murdered, wasn't he?
He was murdered.
Yeah.
He was murdered. And there was a memorial to him, actually, in Westminster Abbey. However, I went on and I worked in all the different, or most of the troubled spots of the world, in negotiation and in reconciliation work. And then I was appointed by Robert Runcie to be his assistant, really, working. My prime responsibility was to travel with him and to arrange his diplomatic and ecclesiastical exchanges and to be an aid to him in his travels and all his overseas work. And whenever overseas problems arose that concerned him, they came to my desk. And of course, we had then in the 80s a spate of hostage taking. And he knew that I had experience in this field. So the first successful one was Iran, when I went to Iran and negotiated for the release of people. Secondly, in Libya, when you do it with Colonel Gaddafi, but when you do this type of work, you recognize that things can go wrong, and you're never sanguine about it. And things did go wrong for me in Beirut, and to cut a long story short, I was captured and spent almost 5 years in very strict solitary confinement. I was chained to the wall for 23 hours and 50 minutes a day. I slept on the floor. I had no natural light, because if I was below ground, then obviously there's no natural light. If I was above ground in a bombed out building, then metal shutters were put in front of the window, so no natural light came in. I had no books and papers for over three years. I had one visit to the bathroom a day, and when anyone came in the cell, I had to pull a blindfold over my eyes so that I didn't see anybody. So it was a situation which is slightly more severe than lockdown at the moment.
Yeah.
Now, some people may wonder and say, well, what has that got to do with things today? It's so remote from what we're experiencing. It's so extreme. But I do believe that it's from extreme situations that we can take understandings that are applicable to so-called normal life, or as it is today, abnormal life, a bit, but it's still fairly normal. We've still got our freedom, we've still, to a limited degree, and we've still got our lives. But there are things that I could make parallels with, which are in fact, related to today. Well, that's a bit of the background. You may want to ask more specifically something.
I was not really intending to talk today about the issue of isolation, because as I reread your story and your book over this last week, and most remarkable book, Taken on Trust, and it became very, very clear that this is incomparable. You know, we, as you say, we do have our freedom. We can walk outside, we can read our books, we can watch our televisions, we can see each other. So in so many ways, we've got our families around us. We've got the ability to exercise, all of the things that were taken away from you. I remember reading about when they first put you back into chains after you've been able to at least pad around the cell or the room for a little while, and then you lost that freedom. How devastating these things were. And there just isn't a comparison. However, something else that numerous people are facing today is perhaps a bit of a feeling of dread, not to the same degree, but that sort of weight of, will I have a job after all of this? Will my company survive this period? Will my sick family members pull through this? And I'd love to hear how you managed that, what for you was a daily wait that went on for nearly 2,000 days of fear and uncertainty that you had to endure. How did you cope with that?
Well, there were two things I could say about that. And this goes back right to the beginning of when I was first captured and recognized that I was a hostage and no longer a negotiator. My first feelings were feelings of anger. And I was angry. I was angry with myself for taking such an extreme risk. I'd been invited to go and see someone who was about to die, or so I was told. And instead of allowing that, I was captured. But that's another story. So I was angry. And if you're angry, you have to do something about it. Because anger does those who hold it more harm than it does those against whom it's held. And I've written a book some time ago called Out of the Silence, which is a book of poetry and reflection. And I very little verse about anger. It said, anger is like a consuming fire, seeking all whom it may devour. Do not extinguish the flames totally, but calm yourself by the gentle glow of the embers. In other words, saying, you allow it to get the better of you, it'll destroy you. But somehow, it's a force that's within us. We all have it. And there are times when we should use it constructively, but constructively. Allow that force to be used constructively. And that's the way I began to take it. But the other one was rather more pertinent to today in some ways, the feeling of anxiety. Now, I was anxious, obviously. When that door in my cell opened, I didn't know whether they were going to come and kill me. I mean, I did go for a mock execution, and I was actually beaten. And those were hard experiences. So you lived every day on the edge, so to speak, with a high degree of anxiety. And then, of course, there was the anxiety about my family. I used to think to myself, oh, my goodness, my children are going through education. Have I, by doing what I've done, have I put a stop to that? As it was, I underestimated the resilience of young people, the resilience of children. They have remarkable resilience, but I didn't think that at the time. And how would my wife be coping? How would she be managing? All these questions that came to mind. And the way to deal with it, or the way I dealt with it, and I suppose we'll all deal with it in different ways, is to say to yourself, first of all, remember you have life now. Today, you have life. Not tomorrow. We live with an illusion, in a sense, when we're in a normal job, that everything is going to be fine tomorrow. Well, it may well be, but it's not at all certain. We've just got certain illusions of certainty. When you're in that stark situation, you are faced with greater threats, of course, but you still have to say, now is the day. Now I'm going to live. And somehow, what I did was I had to concentrate on that and make the now as full as possible, even though I got limited circumstances. Now that meant with no physical exercise or very limited physical exercise, I still had freedom. I still have freedom in the mind. And, I believe that the brain, rather like a muscle, that if you don't use it, it dies on you. And so I began to write in my head. And that, of course, was, as you've already mentioned, the genesis, the beginning of the book Taken on Trust, which was put on paper many years later. So part of the answer is you will feel anxiety, but be calm and live now. And that is one way of actually beginning to face the problem.
Yes, I remember reading how you were quite deliberate about where you would let your mind go, and you would often stop your mind going in certain directions quite deliberately. Again, quite important for today, I imagine.
Well, you do have to have a certain form of discipline about that. I mean, in fact, this may sound callous, but it in fact, it was a mechanism designed to keep myself together. And that was, I had to put my family almost to the back of my mind and not think about them.
Yeah.
Because there was absolutely nothing I could do to change their circumstances, nothing at all. And so I had to do that. And that's another way of saying, well, we don't have to do that today, of course, but we can begin to put a certain discipline and say, look, I'm not going to constantly talk about and worry about what's coming up. I'll make sensible provision. And also recognize, there's another thing to say here, I think, recognize that this is not necessarily a total crisis, because out of every situation of this kind, something creative can emerge. And you could take this opportunity of lockdown as being a real opportunity for reflection, to be able to get to know yourself better. Now, I took that journey, that inner journey, to get to know myself better. Anybody who does that with any degree of honesty will discover, as they take that inner journey, the two sides of personality, of character, the light and the dark, good and evil, call it what you will, which exists within all of us. And somehow, if you concentrate on the darker side of which is in all of us, everybody, nobody's lived a perfect life. We concentrate on that, we could be quickly led into depression and mental deterioration.
Yeah.
And somehow the way to deal with that is to begin to work for an inner wholeness, an integration. Begin to try and find that within yourself, to recognize, look, I'm the same as every other human being. We're all made in the same way. But I'm not necessarily going to let the dark side overcome me. I'm going to try and work for that greater degree of harmony. And also you could discover, and many people have discovered this, I did myself, that I had abilities that I never knew I had. I mean, I'd never written a book before. I've written about 6 or 7 now, but I'd never done that before. I never knew that I had that ability to use words and to write. And that came up from captivity. And so I look back on it and I say, well, no, I wouldn't want to go through that again. And I sometimes say to myself, what on earth did I get through 5 years like that? But then looking back on it, I say it was a most creative period.
Interesting.
And what you can say about today is, at the moment, it may look bleak and difficult, but there's a real possibility that you look back and you say, well, that was a life-changing experience for me. It taught me something about myself. It taught me something about my relationships. It taught me something about my relationship to the world, my attitudes to life, my attitudes to work, my goals in life. All those things can actually come from this experience.
Very, very, very positive, very impressive. Yeah. Now, many people will have to somewhat rebuild things after all this is over, particularly many business owners, private company owners. You've since been back to Beirut at least twice, I think, and I believe that you even offered to go to Iran to negotiate the release of British sailors being held hostage there. How did you prepare yourself to get back in the saddle? That must have been a difficult decision.
It took time before I could say. I mean, I think it's always a question of timing, to know when you are ready for this. But I do not like in my life, and I'm only speaking about myself at the moment, I don't like to leave matters unresolved, if I can put it like that, if I can change it. And I do believe that one should try as best one can to take from situations which appear to be completely negative. I do think you should try and take something try and turn it to something positive. So I went back to Beirut, and I went to meet the group who were responsible for my captivity. Now, previously, I had been at night with a promise to go and see someone who was ill and dying, and it was broken. But I went back at night, and they were surprised to see me.
Wow.
And I said, I sat down, and I said, look, we've been through very difficult times in the past. You have changed, I have changed. Can we take something creative from this experience? So they looked at me, and they said some rather complimentary things, which I won't repeat. And then he said, well, what can we do? And I said, well, I've just come back from the Lebanese border. I've seen people who are ill and about to die and are fleeing from a persecution, they're hungry and cold. Can you let me have heating oil for them? He said, yes, we will do it. Now, it was a very small gesture, very small, but I do believe if we as human beings can take the viewpoint that we need to get alongside people, we need to try and understand why people behave as they behave. We don't condone the bad things that are done, but we always say they can be turned around. Something creative can emerge from them. And, you know, going on from that experience, at my 80th birthday, which was last year, believe it or not, the Lebanese ambassador in London put on a reception for me.
Wow.
Things have gone all the way around.
Extraordinary.
So I'm saying now it's a long time, of course. It's 20 odd years ago, 30 years ago since I was captured. But what is time?
Sure. Today you're heavily involved with and act as a patron for quite a few well-known and maybe a few less well-known charitable organizations. How are you and the teams involved leading that, navigating your way through this period?
With difficulty is the answer to that, because I think every charity has difficulty at the moment. I'll just say a background in that respect. When I came out of captivity, I was, my job had been held open for me. And I was invited to go back to Lambeth. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I now am going to earn my own living by writing and lecturing. I'm not going to take a salary. And I'm going to give my time to the charities that have always concerned me. And I'm not going to take money from them either. And I thought, well, okay, let's give it a go. And I did. And I haven't had a salary for 30 years. You know, I've been able to do it in my way. And founded Hostage International, which is now working all over the world. We're working with hostage families to give them support and working with returning hostages. and that's something that's developed. With the Mayors for the Homeless, I helped start the Mayors in Cambridge 40 odd years ago, not 40 odd years ago, 25 years ago. And that now has it had one community in Cambridge when we started for 25 men and women. And now we have 40 communities across the country.
Amazing.
And then there's Y-Care, which is for young people overseas who have limited opportunity for work, and one has been associated with that. Well, I co-founded that years ago. But we're all facing difficulties. But then everybody's facing difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we have to, for the moment, pull in the reins a bit, like everybody else. But we're not giving up. We're saying, right, we'll mark time a bit. But at the same time, the people who are really suffering at the moment are the people who always suffer in life, the very poor and the vulnerable. And somehow I think we have to make special effort in our work to take care of the very poor and the vulnerable.
Yeah, very good. You always seem to maintain an aura of calm. And I'm sure when you went through your hostage situation, it was maybe more outward than inward, but outwardly there seemed to be a calm, and you kind of never lost that sense of humor. Have you got any suggestions on how we can maintain that for some people who might struggle more than others?
Well, I think partly it's a matter of one's nature, one's temperament, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a funny story not many funny stories in captivity, but I used to plead with my guards to bring me books, and they wouldn't for some reason or other. And one day I met a kindly guard. You always get someone in every organization who has a little bit of a heart. And he said, I'll try and get you a book. But he didn't know what he was going to get because he couldn't read English. And he couldn't be seen going to buy an English book. However, he managed to get one. And one day he came into the cell. Of course, I pulled the blindfold over my eyes, dropped the book by my side. And when he went out of the cell, I picked the book up, looked at it and laughed out loud because, unknown to himself, he brought me great escapes. Stories of escape.
I didn't really...
Absolutely true story. I mean, no idea. But so I mean, one had that sort of a laugh. But just one more story, which I'd like to tell you, which I think relates to what we've been saying before. I had one visit to the bathroom a day, and as I went into that rather primitive bathroom, high up this was when I was on the 3rd floor of an apartment block. High up on the wall was a window, and it was normally covered by a wooden shutter, padlock. And on one occasion I went in, and the padlock had been left loosened. So I clambered up there. There was no chance of getting through it. It was far too small. And the padlock had been loosened, so I climbed up and looked at the street below. And there, along the street, was walking a lady carrying a huge bunch of flowers. And they were really beautiful colours. The first time I'd seen colour for years. And I said to myself, that rather trite saying, you know, the best things in life are free, really.
Very interesting.
It made me deepen my appreciation for that, you know, to be able to feel the wind on my face eventually, to be able to feel the sun, to be able to be surrounded by so much of beauty, even though there is so much of despair and despondency around, to appreciate it and to recognize that perhaps, you know, as a species, we just, all of us need to be in a better relationship with 3 areas: a better relationship with ourselves, a better relationship with our environment, a better relationship with each other. And some may say, well, what part did your faith play in this? I've never believed myself that if you have faith, you have special protection. I don't believe that.
No.
I believe that you take your chance along with everybody else. But
Yeah.
I do believe I could say in the face of my captors, you have the power to bend my mind, and you've tried because I was interrogated. You have the power to break my body, and you've tried because I was beaten. But my soul is not yours to possess. Now, I have a great difficulty in defining what I mean by soul, but in that context, I meant the whole person that I am. It will not be taken by you or anybody because it lies in the hand of God. Now, a very, very simple belief, I admit it, very simple, but enough to give me hope. And in this crisis, which we're all facing in different degrees, if somehow we can find hope within ourselves, give each other hope, because that's important, to be able to give each other hope, we shall begin to come through this actually stronger and better.
Very good, yeah. I agree with you about your faith shouldn't rescue you over others who don't have faith. Otherwise, it would be religion for profit, wouldn't it? We would all be being good for the wrong reasons. And that's not what faith is about at all. But I'll finish with one thing that I recall from your book. When you went into those pretty revolting toilets for that 10 minutes a day, on one occasion, you found a gun with a silencer attached. Now, that must have been a shock.
Well, it was this. I went in, took the blindfold off, and there was a gun. And, when you're in a situation like that, you think 1,000 thoughts go through your mind. And I looked at it and I thought, what have you been saying in all your negotiations, all your life? You've been saying to people who've done terrible things, when you're in a situation, don't use violence. Use your brain. Try and find other ways. And you have to be careful what you say, because what you say has a way of coming back to you. And here it was coming back to me now. I was in a tight situation, faced with using violence. And I thought, no, if I now do that, take that gun and use it, which I'll have to, then I've lost the last shred of integrity that I perhaps have. And pulled him back. He took it. Now, looking back, of course, you can say, was it a trick? Was he trying something on? Were they testing you? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it was genuinely a mistake. And I don't regret doing that. Now, I must add a rider to that. I must say that don't anyone think who's watching this that I have behaved with exemplary way, in an exemplary way all my life. I haven't. But I do think for all of us, there comes a time when you're faced with a critical point and you have to say, now, I have here really to stand on what I believe. Otherwise, I've lost it. And I think that was probably one occasion for me.
That defines integrity, doesn't it?
Which I haven't always had.
Terry, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it, and hope to see you in Lambeth Palace, maybe later in the year or sometime next year when things return to some normality. But we do appreciate you taking your time from your home in Suffolk to speak to us. Thank you so much.
Well, can I just say to everybody, thanks for listening. If you've listened this far, if you haven't gone to sleep. And the words are, I finished an article the other day, and then someone said, oh, that reminds me of the words of an old hymn. And it was, Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways. And in deeper rest thy service find. And how does it finish off? Drop thy still dews of quietness, till all our striving cease. Take from our minds the strain and stress, and let our ordered lives confess beauty of thy peace.
Mm. Wonderful. Thank you. It's like finishing with a prayer. We appreciate it.